Hello and welcome to this video tutorial from BlenderCookie.com. My name is Jonathan Williamson, and today I've got a really cool project for you, and it's one that a lot of people have asked for, and one that you see people practically screaming for tutorials for when they see videos of it online on things like YouTube. And this project is recreating light streaks like those that you would see in the original iPod Nano commercials, where people are moving an iPod through the air that's then capturing through low exposure all the different lights on it, and you're getting these really cool streaks moving through space that are then colored and such that give a really cool effect. And a lot of people normally recreate this in After Effects, but a lot of people have also tried to do it in Blender, and with very mixed results, some really good, some not so good. And I've tried it myself multiple different times, and until now I've never really come up with a good solution for it. Normally I've tried doing it through particles or with curves, and the particles, while being the ideal solution if you can get it to work, is, since they're very extensible, they tend to get very messy, and you spend a lot of time working with problems that you don't want to deal with, things like images not lining up, to particles not blurring together, to particles just being a mess, you name it. The particle system is wonderful, but for something like this, it's not very good for creating continuous streaks or lines of a single color. And that's what we want for this, because it should replicate the effect that you would get from a high exposure camera capturing a light moving through the air. And so what I want to do is we're going to create this using an array and curve modifiers with a single plane that's UV mapped with an image that then is tileable to extend to create these streaks. And so we're going to start out by, first off, with the default scene in Blender 2.5 Alpha 2. As you can see, if we bring up the splash screen, this was just released a couple of days ago. We're going to go ahead and use it. And so I'm going to start out by deleting both the default cube and the default lamp, because we won't need them. And then we're going to reset the location and the rotation on the camera by hitting Alt-R and Alt-G consecutively. And then from top view, I'm going to rotate it around the x-axis by hitting R and X, and then type in 90 degrees. And then I'm going to move it back along the y-axis by hitting G and Y to bring it back so just we have a flat viewing angle. And so we're going to do all of our work right in here. Excuse me. And so let's go ahead and start out by creating our arrayed object. And so from top view, let's hit Shift A and add a plane. And we'll go ahead and scale this plane down to, say, 0.5 or so. And hit Tab to go into edit mode. And I'm first going to hit Control Space to turn off my manipulators since they're just distracting. And then I'm going to bring these two vertices on the inside in along the x-axis right to the center line, just such that it's basically a half a plane, as if I were using a mirror modifier. But in this case, I'm actually going to use an array. And so let's move over and add an array modifier. And with this array, I want to do a couple things. First off, I want to leave the relative offset, but then I want to change the fit type to a fit curve. That way we'll have a curve control the length of it. And the way that we're going to make this is we're going to have two curves. We're going to have one curve that will designate the path of this arrayed object, or of our light streaks. And then we're going to have another curve that defines the length of the streak. And so by animating the size of that second curve, we can actually make the light streaks basically barrel down the second path and give us full control over the speed, the distance, everything. And so let's first add that second curve by hitting Shift A, Curve, and Path. And you can use any curve for this, but a path is nice because it's straight by default. And so hitting Tab to go into edit mode, I'm going to pull it over such that the endpoint here is right at the cursor. And then in object mode, let's move it over along the y-axis just so it's out of the way. And let's go and hit N to bring up our panel, and we're going to name this. We'll call this streak underscore length. Let's name our array as streak. And this isn't necessary, it's just good practice. And on the array, let's then click on the curve field and select our streak length. And let's hit Control A to apply the scale on our array so that it fits the curve length. And now if we scale up our curve in object mode, you can see that it controls the length of the array. So this is very cool. Now, what I want to do is let's go ahead and add in the curve that it's going to follow, the path. And so I'm going to switch to camera view, and I want to go ahead and use the grease pencil to actually draw in some curves. We could do this manually, but it's really kind of you know, it's a very manual process, it's tedious, and it's not very accurate to just, you know, try and place a bunch of curves in 3D for this to follow. Using the grease pencil, we can actually just draw in the curves and get a very natural flow to it. So in the End panel, toggle down your grease pencil and go ahead and click Add New Layer. And we can just use the default settings, and first, drawing at the cursor with the cursor set to the center, go ahead and just draw in a couple strokes. Although, whoops, one thing that I forgot is to draw a line, just hold down D and then left click and drag to draw that in. But don't overlap any lines, because what we're now going to do is we're going to switch to 3D view, and we're going to set the draw settings to stroke and only endpoints. And then if you just left click or hold down D and left click and drag at those endpoints, you can then merge through like that. And the reason that we're not doing this at the same time, actually we're going to undo that one, and we're actually going to uncheck the endpoints. And let's hold down D and do it like so. And now we can just draw through a bunch of different curves. So there we go. Maybe we'll undo that last one and make that nice and smooth or so. So now what we can do is we're going to go ahead and convert the curve, and we're going to convert it to a path. And if you then toggle down the grease pencil again, we can then hit the I to hide it, just so it's out of the way. And with the path selected, let's go ahead and select it. Hit Tab to go into edit mode. And first select everything and hit W smooth a whole bunch of times, 20 or 30 or so, just to smooth out all those jagged edges that we are getting. And then let's go ahead and we want to remove a bunch of these points because we don't want nearly that many, and it really just makes it, frustrating. So what we can do is let's select every nth point, and we'll do a few here. And I guess I've never actually used this. So instead we're going to go ahead and let's just select random. There we go. And we're going to make sure we don't have any continuous sets, too many areas, and then we can just hit erase selected. And that'll get rid of a lot of them. We'll go through and delete a few where they're still pretty heavy. And, we don't have to be real precise here. Okay, and in this area where we had edges, let's go ahead and select the 2 points and hit F to create a segment. And let's now select everything and hit smooth a few more times. Maybe move some of these curves away from each other. If you want to modify them very easily, you can go and use proportional editing to get in some more work. As you can see, if we hadn't erased a whole bunch of those, we would be dealing with a nightmare, frankly. And we'll erase a few more. And there we go. And you may think, well, that was, that really wasn't very automatic using the grease pencil. But in comparison to what it would be creating all these by hand, it's actually much, much easier, at least in my opinion, and much quicker. For one, you can just kind of draw it any way you want. If you want a set pattern, you're good to go. And so now what we're going to do is maybe we'll adjust our camera a little bit. Let's go ahead and select our arrayed object again. And on the modifier, let's go ahead and add a new modifier. And we want to add a curve. We'll go ahead and toggle down the array for the time being. And we're going to set this to our GP layer curve, which we can go ahead and rename we'll just name this streak path. And now when we set that curve, you'll notice that it follows it. So if we then scale this up, turn off proportional editing, you can see it going right along there. And one thing that you'll notice is that it's starting here in an interesting point, and that's because we, again, have 2 different segments. So we'll delete those, fill that segment, and then you'll see it starting at the beginning. And there we go. So now if we scale this around, you can see it following that curve very nicely. But right now, it's perhaps a little large. It's a lot larger than our arrayed object. So let's go ahead and hit Tab on the curve, select everything, and hit Alt-S to scale down the radius to a decent level, about there or so. There we go. And now let's go ahead and just scale this up just so we can see it in our camera. And we want to get rid of these intersecting points. And so let's go in and we'll select these areas. One thing that you can do is you can go ahead and use your Control-T for tilt to tilt some areas if you want. And maybe we'll go ahead and pull these out. And don't worry too much about causing jagged edges, because you can fix those real quickly using the smooth tool. Just like this. Okay, we'll go ahead and move these ones back as well, after I'm going to delete a few more segments here. Pull that back. Control T, tilt it around. Delete those segments. Smooth everything. And there we go. That way we don't have any intersecting points. And now let's go ahead and look at this in the render. Oh, we have a few more points here that are intersecting. And so we'll just select these real quick. Move them over like this. Pull that back. Get rid of a bunch of these segments. And there we go. Okay, maybe we'll smooth everything a few more times. The main thing is just to keep everything nice and smooth. So now let's go ahead and let's add a subsurf modifier to this. Make sure it's nice and smooth. We'll go ahead and turn on optimal draw. And you can see now with this, we'll also set shading to smooth. We need to turn on the merge on the array so that the vertices merge together. And now obviously if we render this, we're not going to see a lot. Oh, and before I render, one thing to note, there is a bug in 2.5 that if you render basically more than once in full screen mode, it will crash Blender. But if you switch over to image editor, it will not, and you're good to go. So that's a quick fix, but something to be aware of, or it can be very frustrating. So now we can hit render, and we can see it's just straight black. So what I want to do now is go over to the world, and we're going to set the world to black. Let's turn on environment lighting. And there we go. And we'll go ahead and turn on, and we want to turn this over to approximate, such that we don't get the noise like you were seeing. And maybe the radius is still a bit large on these, so let's select everything. We'll pull that down. That ought to be good. So now we'll render that. Okay, and now we're ready to really start working with it. And what I'm going to do is we're going to, on our arrayed object, let's go ahead and add in a material, and we'll just call this streak. And let's go ahead and add a texture. And we're going to add in an image texture. And the image texture that I'm going to use is just a very simple image that I created in Photoshop called, oops, go back, find the correct one. There we go, light streaks. And I'm actually in the wrong folder, but I want this one here. And it's called streak_in, and it'll be included with the source downloads if you have them. And what it is, if we look at it, is basically a, I'll just go ahead and pull it up. I meant to actually have it in the other folder. As you can see, it's basically three white bars that fade out on the edges and fade out towards the end. And we're going to use this to basically define our light streaks. And so first we're going to set it to UVs. So let's go ahead and split our view here by left clicking and dragging on the handle here. We're going to switch one over to the UV image editor. We'll hit X to get rid of the render result. And let's bring in that streak in. And we'll maybe turn on the alpha channel or turn off the alpha channel. There we go. So now we can see it like it is. And where find my, there we go, UVs. So we're first going to hit Alt-C in 3D view so we can see what this is looking like. And we want to go ahead and bring this in and just replicate just this one portion here such that it's tileable. Because we're actually going to use this blended out section for an end cap that we'll put on the array that'll make the edges kind of blend out nicely. So let's just bring in the edge here. About like that. And then we'll bring everything over and away from the margins just a little bit, just to make sure that it's not going to grab any of the margin, which tends to have, you tend to see just like a black pixel. And so we don't want that because we don't want any seams. And so you can see that it's now extending along the whole thing very nicely. And so in the texture view, we want to then go ahead and set the coordinates for the mapping to UV. And we want to go ahead and tell it to, under the image sampling, to use the alpha, which it does by default. And then under the influence, we want to turn off color and turn on the alpha. And we'll go ahead and leave it at 100% starting out. And let's go ahead and render this and see what we get now. Oh, we don't get anything. And that's because under the materials, we forgot to go ahead and turn on transparency and turn the alpha down to 0. And we'll go ahead and turn the specularity down to 0 as well. So now when we render, you can see what we're getting. Oh, okay, very cool. So now we're extending the light streaks along it. And this is actually getting pretty close to being done aside from compositing. So what I want to do now is let's go ahead and let's scale back our curve a little bit so we can see the end, because we want to go and add an end cap, because we want to blend this in. And so what I'm going to do is we're going to select our arrayed object, we're going to hit Shift D to duplicate it, and then I want to erase all the modifiers from it because I want it to be just default. And so I'm going to go ahead and take this and let's go ahead and we'll rename this to streak underscore end. And then I'm going to, under the arrayed object, we're going to set the end cap to streak underscore end. And you can see it right here. Well, you can't really see it, but I can demonstrate it. If I add in a subsurf modifier to this one, you can see it's then being subsurfed twice and the edges aren't merging. So what I want to do now is I'm going to go ahead and just bring this out a little. And then I'm going to go ahead and on the UVs, bring this one out as well to the edge, just about. So if we see it in the UV view, which you can't really because it doesn't display the transparency very well, you can see what's happening. And right now, actually, what's happening is that it's reversed. And so what we need to do is go ahead and flip this around. So let's just hit S and X, scale to -1, and flip it around. So now you can see that it's going along quite nicely. And if we go ahead and hit render, you can now see it's being faded out a little bit. Maybe not too drastically, but it is. And this could definitely be improved by improving the actual gradient on this, but this is definitely better than the sharp end that we had a little bit before. You'll also notice that right now we are rendering our end cap. And so I'm going to go ahead in the outliner, just turn off its renderability. And then we can also go ahead and hit H to hide it to get it out of our way. So at this point, we have this, which is pretty cool. So let's go ahead and take it into the compositor now and really add some more pop to it. So we're going to go ahead and in our UV image window here, let's switch this over to a node editor. We're going to turn on the compositing nodes here, tell it to use nodes, use a backdrop so we can see it in the viewport. And let's go ahead and just hit Control space or Shift space to make this window full screen. Just make use of all our screen real estate possible. And for those people that are not familiar with the node editor, we basically have an input, which is the render layer here. You can see the preview, and a composite node, which is our final output here. And so anything we do in between this will then be fed into this and give us our final result. And so what I'm going to start by doing is we're going to start by blurring these out so we can add kind of a glow to it. And what I'm actually going to do is I'm actually going to layer two blurs on top of each other to make it softer. So we're going to hit Shift A and add a filter blur. And we want to pull in the image node point from here to here. I'm also going to add a output viewer node that allows me to pull it into the background. The background is powered via the viewer nodes, so you can have as many viewer nodes as you want that are able to see your progression at any point along the node network and then feed it into the background so you can watch your progression. And I'm going to go ahead and let's just blur this maybe, how about 20 by 20? That ought to do it. Or maybe we'll even go, say, 30 by 30. Any way that we want. And we'll go ahead and maybe use a... Oh, I kind of like the flat blur. Actually, I think that'll probably work. We can change this later. And then I'm going to hit Shift D, add another blur. And again, we're going to pull in the same filter. We'll duplicate the viewer node as well. Pull this in. And I'm only going to do 15 by 15. Okay. And now I want to add in a mix node. It allows me to overlay two different nodes on top of each other. And so I first want to go ahead and blur or mix this node on top of this node. And so I'm going to go ahead and first we'll pull this one into the top, this one into the bottom. And personally, I always forget which point is which in terms of which node you should pull in. And so I always do it trial by error, but it's one of those things you can very easily just swap them around. If you swap it, it automatically detects it. And we'll go ahead and set this to, let's try setting it to add. And now we can play with the value. And that'll just get a softer blur than you would see with either one of these. So that's working pretty well. And so now let's go ahead and we're going to duplicate our mix and our viewer node once more. And we want to go ahead and mix our original light streaks on top of the blur. So that way we're getting these kind of nice highlights on top of the blur, which will give us that glow. And we'll get that to connect. There we go. And so now you can see, there we go, that's starting to look pretty cool. And setting it to add will make it pop all that much more. And so I like to do that. And so now let's go ahead and I want to color this. So let's hit Shift A and we're going to pull in a input RGB node that allows us to put in just a solid color. And we're going to duplicate our mix and viewer node again so we can see this. We'll go and move the composite node over a little further. And I want to pull in, I like blue light streaks, so let's try that. And so we'll go ahead and pull that, and we're going to mix it with our last mix, and then a color, so that we're overlaying everything, and we're going to set that to overlay so that only the color's being added and not everything. And so you can see we need to swap these around. There we go. Oh, there we go. That's starting to look pretty cool. Get a nice color in there. And one of the cool things about this is you see it really start to pop around the areas where it overlaps each other. And we can actually increase this a bit if we tone down the opacity on these such that they really start to layer together, but we'll maybe play with that a bit more. Let's go ahead and pull in a hue and saturation node just to add in a little more pop to it. And we'll duplicate our viewer and we'll see what we're getting. Pull up the saturation. Don't pull up too much. We can adjust the hue to get a more accurate color of what we want. Kind of play with it. Play with the value. Ooh, there we go. If we pull up the value, you can see it really starts to pop in some of those areas. And we can maybe even try overlaying the original white once more. So let's go ahead and try that, just to see what we get, maybe get a little extra pop. And we'll do this one more time. And let's see what we're getting. I'm going to set this to add. There we go. And then if we can play with this to tone it down any way that we want. And of course, any time that you want, you can play with the blending modes to see what you like, see what works out well for you. In this case, I'm going to go ahead and stick to the add. And there we go. So that's starting to look real cool. But let's see what this looks like animated, because right now, it's a still frame. It's not overly exciting. So one thing we want to do, let's go ahead and pull this into the composite node such that anytime we now render like this, it will go ahead and composite all of that together. And it would seem that I missed something somewhere or another. There we go. Okay. So now it's all compositing together. So let's go ahead and animate this. And this is actually remarkably easy to animate. What we can do is simply animate the scale of this curve to send it along. And so let's go ahead and scale it way down such that it's right at the beginning. And we'll go into camera view. And let's go and turn on record. And so we'll just scale and then left click and that'll insert a keyframe at frame 1. Oh, actually we want to go to frame 1. There we go. And let's set the end to, let's just do a 100 frame animation. And we'll go ahead and go up to our last frame and scale it all the way along like so. And we'll go ahead and that'll automatically insert a keyframe. And if we want to control the speed anyway, so maybe part way we want it to speed up, so maybe it's starting out kind of slow, maybe we'll scale it back a little bit, and then it gets really quick, and then maybe slows back down. So if we then play that, you can see it going right through. Very cool. So now if we render this, we can just render it out as an animation. So I'm going to set my output. We'll just go to streaks animation, accept. I'm going to save it out as a QuickTime movie. And we'll go ahead and tell it to be called light streaks. Streaks, if I can type. There we go. And then we can just simply hit render animation. And I'll go and pause my recording while this is rendering so you don't have to sit through it. And there you have it. This is well, we'll go ahead and play back the animation real quick. Just open this with QuickTime. You can see this go right through. So very, very cool, very simple, but a very easy technique to set up. It's very quick. You know, you can set this up in a matter of minutes and be up and running. Obviously, you can do the curves any way that you want. You can, since this is just a single texture that's mapped to an individual plane that's then just tiled, you can do that texture any way that you want. You can have multiple colors. Anything that you wanted to do with it, you could on very, very short amount of time without having to worry about particles, without having to worry about anything like that. And so, you know, obviously, it may not be ideal for all situations, but I would say that using this technique with the array and the curves, you could probably get away with it for about 95% of things, and definitely for most any hobbyist project. So I hope that you've enjoyed this. I hope to see some light streaks coming out on the forums on Blender Cookie, and as always, thanks for watching.